Joining me now is the South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas, and a lot to talk about with you, Premier. The energy crisis, first of all. You say that there are many policymakers across the country, present and past, I presume, who should be deeply ashamed. Can you explain to our viewers your thinking on that?
Well, Kieran, we live in one of the most energy-rich countries anywhere in the world, yet at the moment we've got a domestic energy supply crisis, and I think that speaks to mass market failure, but just as importantly, I think it speaks to long-term policy failure. I don't think the energy wars and the climate wars have served our nation very well at all, and now it's all coming a cropper where we see the national electricity market collapsing. I think that should be the source of great concern, but that doesn't necessarily get us anywhere. What we need now is thoughtful policy leadership. There are no silver bullets here. This has been a problem that's been amassing for a decade. But what we do need is serious leadership from both the Commonwealth and indeed the states to make sure we find our way out of this crisis.
I know that during your campaign, a big focus was on the hydrogen policy. You committed to that. I guess that's sort of a longer term, medium to longer term focus. Have you got anything in mind that can be done now to stop this immediate crisis?
So South Australia is actually the lead legislature when it comes to the federation around the national electricity market. I've made it clear to Minister Bowen today that given that responsibility invested in our state, we're more than happy to work expeditiously as a government, as a state parliament, to pass any law reform that is required to the NEM. That said, every time we have this conversation around energy, people are looking for the short-term fix, and I understand that, particularly given the acuity of the crisis that we're now enduring. But we've got to start making the long-term decisions. Now, our policy is to build what will be Australia's largest hydrogen electrolyser and power plant. That'll be government-owned and it'll participate in the market to firm up renewables, to provide security to the energy platform in our state and the NEM more broadly.
And is the technology there for that now?
We believe so, absolutely. In fact, we've only been in government for a couple of months, but we've already opened up a market sounding process that has been inundated by some of the most sophisticated and the world's largest engineering houses to do this work. It can be done. We're a smart nation, we're an energy-rich nation, and certainly in our state, we've been a leader in energy transformation, and we want to continue that effort.
Can that hub that you and the Minister are going to be looking at, or pursuing, not looking at, you're pursuing it, will that be able to shore up the energy market across the east as well, or is it more a South Australian focus?
No, this is bite size and it's very much South Australian focus. What we're talking about here is 200 megawatts. Now, while that's significant, that doesn't shore up the national energy supply. But what it is a demonstration of is that hydrogen is going to be a fuel that makes a big difference to our nation's energy security in the long term. But just as importantly, it is the intersection of hydrogen production and hydrogen being used for electricity generation in conjunction with renewables that provides security of supply in terms of energy. And that's the sort of thoughtful policy leadership that we're going to need as we in a race to decarbonise around the country.
WA's had this gas reservation for domestic use for a number of decades now. The East, including South Australia, is not. Do you think we should have a domestic gas reservation for the rest of the country, at least for this interim period, to get us through to this balance that you're talking about?
Well, I do think what we're starting to see is a bit of effort being undertaken at a federal level around the Australian domestic gas reservation mechanism, which is already in existence as a policy, and about how that can be reviewed and assessed and how it could operate in the context of the crisis that we're now experiencing. I welcome that discussion. I think we should be looking to Western Australia to see how their energy needs are being met. I mean, they're not connected to the national electricity market. They have a domestic gas reservation policy and the sky isn't falling in. In fact, arguably they're in a better position than the rest of the country. I think that should be examined closely. It doesn't necessarily mean that domestic gas reservation can be retrospectively inserted into the gas market on the East Coast, but it does mean that we should be examining all options, and I welcome the fact that Minister Bowen has said exactly that.
On a few other matters, this preschool announcement by your counterparts in New South Wales and Victoria, universal preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds, I know that you committed to a substantial investigation or inquiry into this space. Would you be open to this sort of thing and joining in?
Well, I welcome the announcements coming from Victoria and New South Wales. So We announced a commitment to have a Royal Commission into this exact subject, and that's because the policy delivery is actually quite complex, which has been acknowledged by Premier Peter and Premier Andrews. This is a big undertaking. They're talking about it taking years. This isn't going to happen in one term. What we want to do is make sure that we get the execution of the policy right. We're committed to having a Royal Commission, and we're still going to undertake that. But the announcements today, I think, are very much a recognition of the fact that we have to, as a country, start to invest in early childhood education in a far more substantial way. Australia underperforms in this regard in comparison to the rest of the OECD. In fact, the OECD average in terms of spending on early childhood education outweighs Australia's contribution by 3 to 1. So we've got a lot of catch up to do in this country on early childhood education. States have a role to play in that regard. I welcome the policy announcement today, but we're going to pursue it aggressively as a state as well, because that's what we committed at our recent state election.
You did indeed. The other thing you committed to was boosting the hospital system.
Yes.
The ambulance ramping was a huge issue in your election campaign. Is this something that you want to prioritise when you meet with the Prime Minister and other state leaders tomorrow?
Absolutely. And I don't think it'll be just me as a lone voice, Kieran. I think this is a problem we're now seeing throughout the rest of the country. I don't think there is a state government or a territory government in the nation that isn't having to endure scrutiny over the performance of the hospitals, particularly the ambulance service and also ambulance ramping at emergency departments.
Is it all about more dollars?
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because it's not. Now, more dollars matters, right? And I don't believe now is a time for the Commonwealth to be reducing their funding. Let's be clear about that. But it's not just about throwing more money at the problem. We have to, as a nation, embark on serious reform about making sure the primary healthcare system, the aged care system and the NDIS system is working far more collaboratively with the hospital system. The states are in charge of hospitals, but we don't have any visibility or much control over aged care, where so many hospital patients come from and ultimately have to go back to. Similarly with the NDIS and GPs, and we've got to start reforming that effort. Otherwise, an argument about the money won't address the long-term issue.
Premier, I appreciate your time, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks for that.
Thanks a lot, Kieran. Cheers.